Engineers from the City of Johannesburg have confirmed that Wednesday's explosion on Bree Street was as a result of a gas leak. They have not yet been able to establish the source of the gas. Officials also say the evaluation of the surrounding streets and structures showed that some roads lacked structural integrity and have since been cordoned off. Let's get some insight on the possible source of the gas, as well as why the roads were so terribly damaged to a point of splitting in half. Professor Richard Walls from the Structural Engineering Division at Stellenbosch University's Department of Civil Engineering joins me now. Very good morning to you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. Of course, a lot of questions still being asked here, because what we have really established and what has been ruled out is that it has nothing to do with illegal mining. It really was as a result of a gas explosion. But there's still a lot of black and white in terms of the finer details, how this could have happened, where the line was, because a lot of what we also heard was that they couldn't reach some of the lines because of the extensive rubble. What is your take?
Hi, good morning to listeners. So yes, we're going to need to find out exactly where the source is. Now, last week there was a lot of speculation. I mean, I myself had no idea which gas it was. Definitely a combustible of sorts. Friday afternoon in the media briefing, Mr. Johan Lafrangi's a fire expert, well respected in the community, spoke at the meeting how it is being pointed to methane as the combustible gas. And that could come from a number of sources. Now, natural gas, which there are some natural gas pipelines around there, is primarily methane, so it could be natural gas leaking. Methane is also a byproduct from sewers, etc. However, I think we need quite a lot of gas to escape and a very specific source for it to come. It's not out the question, but probably more likely an existing gas line. And also, from my understanding, is that they found what they referred to as an old Johannesburg gas line, and there seems to be some uncertainty of where this gas line comes from and goes to, and how come it has gas in it. So there seems to be some discussions regarding that. But as you say, the investigations will be ongoing, so we don't have certainty at the stage. So they may find additional sources within the tunnel as they continue to investigate. But details seem to be pointing to some sort of methane explosion, but we'll wait to see as things unfold.
How intricate does methane become? Because I understand that it can be in two forms, from extraction from fossil fuels, from wells, and distributed by pipeline. What are the finer details on that regard? Because we're also learning that perhaps the recent big water cuts by Rand Water may have also had an impact with sewers not being emptied as per normal. What is your take on that?
There could be a number of things that had impacted this. I mean, yes, so there was definitely a source of methane from somewhere, and it would have to go in there. Yes, for instance, if there was a flow that could suddenly come up from a damaged sewer pipe into it, perhaps. I mean, we need a fair amount, but it's not out the question. I mean, there was a tremor in Joburg a while ago. I mean, perhaps that was the straw that broke the camel's back and caused a bit of damage to a line. So there could be a number of things that caused it. But methane, it's a very simple hydrocarbon, CH4. And it's got an lower and upper flammability limit, so somewhere between 5 and 15%. So a section of that tunnel, because I have seen photos in the briefing Friday afternoon where they actually showed pictures of the tunnel, and it looks roughly a sort of a 2 by 2 meter tunnel, a couple of 100 meters long. And so you need somewhere between 5 and 15% methane in that mix, which actually works out a lot less than you might think. It's about 36 grams per cubic meter of methane that you need for that sort of 1 cubic meter to be now in a flammable region. And then so a few hundred meters. So even if 100 meters of tunnel, you only need 15 kilograms of methane to make that entire 100 meters of tunnel within the flammability region. And what happens when it ignites, you just need a very small spark. Methane ignites, it releases an enormous amount of energy. I mean, it's a pure hydrocarbon, it's a fuel. So it heats things up very quickly, and what happens is then it creates a pressure wave. So then it basically creates a detonation front. And that goes supersonic. So the research in the literature, there's been a lot of methane explosions in tunnels around the world, especially in mining. and they've recorded speeds of over 1,500 meters a second of the detonation front. So you've got this hypersonic blast wave that effectively moves down the tunnel and then creates very high overpressures. My sort of very rough estimates of the pressure needed to lift that roadway up would be, let's say, somewhere between 100, 200, 300 kilopascals. However, the pressure recorded over 1,000 kilopascals. It very easily, the pressures that have been observed, measured, and calculated in these sorts of explosions in tunnels could have easily lifted the road and done what we've seen there. So it seems to point consistently to flammable gas, as it could be something other than methane, but the pressures, damage, etc., all seems to point in that direction.
Yeah. What we did establish on Friday when that briefing was underway was that the buildings, to all indications, are said to be safe to some regard. How was this determined in terms of calculation? Because and the scientific formula behind it? Because the roads lack structural integrity, and people have been cautioned to stay away because it could become dangerous.
The roads and the buildings are supported in two very different ways. So the buildings have what's called piled foundations. So those are basically concrete columns that have been drilled into the ground, filled up with concrete and reinforcing steel. Those go down 5, 10, 20, 50 meters from the ground level. They're very robust, very thick. And also, if you have a look at the shop fronts and the businesses in the area, when the blast occurred, you don't see any cracking or minimal cracking of the brickwork, the glass facades, etc. So if the pressure wave that arrived at the building wasn't sufficient to damage the brickwork, then it wouldn't be sufficient to damage the piled foundations. Now, very close, if the tunnel where this occurred in, or the service shaft, if that was very close to a building, I mean, that would just need to be double checked. But that's why the buildings are quite well supported. However, where the pictures that they showed, as I said, looked like a 2 by 2 meter shaft, when that blew, it effectively lifted up the road, and it was probably some sort of culvert or concrete structure, and it basically blew the roof off. So now you've got a big 2 meter by, let's say, 2 meter hole in the road, which things are falling into. And most of the energy went up. So it actually lifted the road, damaged the road in the vicinity. That's why the road is extremely damaged, and it's actually falling into that channel. So the road is of great concern, but yet engineers are identifying the buildings as primarily safe. So that's the main difference between the roads and the buildings.
We've heard that the disaster area will soon become a construction site. And, of course, one of the big challenges points to the rubble that is still in the way. What considerations need to be made before this process happens, from disaster area to construction site?
The main thing is they need to continue mapping out where these tunnels and ducts are and what is in them. And the main thing is, my understanding is they got quite active early on. Thankfully, we've got quite a technical team leading it, Mr. Johan Lachanji, and then involved also Dr. Antonio Chichones. So we've got solid technical experts involved, and they started venting the tunnels with the other team members involved. So that what you want to do is make sure that even if there are combustible gases around, it's well below the low flammability limit. So you can't have an ignition. So that's why they were opening manholes, etc. I did see a preliminary video afterwards circulating and some gas data results. And when they opened a manhole, you actually see this gas pouring upwards. So methane is lighter, and also the combustible products. And I saw a gas reading which had high levels of carbon monoxide, which is poisonous and explosive. So you'd need to then vent those out, open the manholes, and then just remove any form of combustible gases so that you're now getting down to sort of safe levels so that it can't be, can't cause an explosion again. And so once that is done and you can put fans on, basically blow everything out, then you can hopefully reduce the probability of this happening. I think the biggest challenge is that they obviously need to identify what's the source. And until you know what the source is, it's very difficult to say categorically it cannot happen again.
Some of the complexities, well, you'll perhaps tell me, we're learning that Igoli gas is not the only gas line underground. Does that make the process even more difficult?
Yeah, because obviously you've got to run through all the sources. So if you've got the more lines on, and this is quite a long length of road that's been damaged, and with the shockwave, the speed it moved, I mean, I'm actually not sure which point the ignition started, but the more sources there, the more you've got to investigate. And so you need to make sure that that is all addressed. Sorry, give me 1 second. My children have come to visit quickly on Sunday morning. We need to just make sure that all the sources there have been investigated and validated. So you've got to make sure every single potential source has been confirmed as not being the source. And those streets around there are over 100 years old. So you could have an enormous number of old pipes and facilities, etc. So the team really has their job cut out for them, looking at what happened and looking where could it come from and ruling them all out.
Thank you so much, Professor Richard Walls. Let's let you get back to parenting duty, but very well analysed. Thank you for your time. Let's perhaps leave it there for now. Professor Richard Walls from the Structuring Engineering Division at Stellenbosch University's Department of Civil Engineering.